Ethan Caldwell stepped into Dawson's Bakery on a crisp Chicago afternoon. The bell above the door jingled softly. The scent of warm bread and cinnamon filled the air. Outside, Lake Michigan's waves lapped against the shore. The city skyline loomed tall, a forest of steel and glass. Ethan, at 34, ruled that forest. A billionaire real estate mogul, he owned half the properties piercing the clouds. His dark suit was sharp, his jaw tighter. Control was his kingdom, and he never let it slip. But today, he needed something. Or rather, someone. The bakery was small, almost swallowed by the towering buildings around it. Flour dusted the wooden counter. A woman stood behind it, rolling dough with steady hands. Claire Dawson, 28, had auburn hair tied loosely back. Her apron was stained with butter and hope. She didn't notice him at first, lost in her work. Her bakery was her world, the last piece of her parents' dream. But bills piled high, and the ovens grew cold too often. She was drowning, though her hazel eyes still burned bright. Ethan cleared his throat. Claire looked up, startled. Her hands paused mid-roll. He dealt smile, dealt soften. Ethan Caldwell, he said, voice low and firm. I have a proposition for you. Claire wiped her hands on her apron, sizing him up. She knew his name, everyone did. The man who turned Chicago into his chessboard. What could he want with her? She tilted her head, curious but wary. Go on, she said, crossing her arms. I need a fiancé, Ethan stated, as if ordering coffee. Just for a month. My latest project, a skyscraper on the West Loop, has investors nervous. A scandal in the tabloids called me a heartless playboy. They want stability, a family man. I'm offering $1 million to play the part. Claire's jaw dropped, then snapped shut. $1 million? Enough to save her shop, pay the debts, keep her parents' legacy alive? But this man with his cold blue eyes? Delt looked like a savior. He looked like a storm. Why me? She asked, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Ethan stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking on the worn floor. You're perfect, he said. Simple, authentic, believable, no one would question it. Claire bristled at simple, but the money whispered louder than her pride. She thought of the eviction notice tucked in her drawer, the ovens she couldn't fix. Fine, she said at last, but this is business, nothing more. Ethan nodded, a flicker of amusement in his gaze. Agreed. Their first test came that evening. Ethan insisted on a public debut to seal the story. They met at a bustling cafe near Millennium Park. Claire wore a cream dress she found in her closet, paired with scuffed boots she couldn't replace. Ethan arrived in a tailored coat, his presence parting the crowd. Cameras flashed from a distance, tipped off by his team. He took her hand, firm but not gentle. We're engaged, he murmured. Act like it. Claire swallowed, then leaned in. She kissed him. Not a peck, not a performance, but a fierce, sudden press of her lips to his. The crowd gasped. Ethan froze, his breath catching. Her warmth flooded through him, sharp and uninvited. His hands tightened on her waist, instinct overriding his script. She tasted of sugar and defiance, a flavor he'd out-expect. The kiss lingered, too long for a charade. When she pulled back, her eyes locked on his, bold and unyielding. Don't think you own me, Ethan Caldwell, she whispered, loud enough for only him to hear. Ethan blinked, his pulse racing. The cameras clicked wildly, but he barely noticed. Claire stepped back, brushing her hair behind her ear like nothing happened. The crowd buzzed. The story sold. But inside, Ethan felt a crack. Control, his oldest friend, slipped a fraction. She went just a pawn. She was a flame, flickering too close to his carefully built walls. He straightened his tie, forcing a smirk. Good start, he said, voice cool again. Let's keep it up. Claire turned away, hiding a smirk of her own. She had agreed for the money, yes, but that kiss? That was hers, a spark she ignited on her terms. As they walked out, hand in hand for the cameras, Ethan glanced at her. Her boots scuffed the pavement, her dress swayed softly. Simple, had called her, yet something told him she was anything but. This deal, this month, might cost him more than $1 million. It might cost him everything he thought he knew about himself. Back at his office later, Ethan stared out at Chicago's lights. The Hancock Tower gleamed, his empire reflected in its glass. He rubbed his lips, still feeling her. Claire Dawson was a means to an end, nothing more, but that kiss lingered, a question he couldn't answer. Across town, Claire locked her bakery, the money already a lifeline in her mind. She dealt trust Ethan Caldwell, not yet, but Shed play his game, and maybe, just maybe, Shed win more than she bargained for. Claire Dawson locked the bakery door 3 weeks ago, her hands trembling. The eviction notice sat crumpled in her apron pocket. Rent was overdue, suppliers cut her off. Dawson's bakery was just a shop. It was her parents' legacy. They built it with love, kneading dough until dawn, dreaming of a chain across Chicago. A car accident stole them 5 years back, leaving Claire alone with their recipes and a sinking ship. She fought to keep it alive, baking through tears. But the numbers add up. She was losing everything. Across town, Ethan Caldwell paced his penthouse, 30 floors above the Chicago River. At 34, he was a billionaire by grit and genius. His father was a Wall Street titan, his mother a socialite who left when he was 10. They gave him money, not warmth. Ethan learned early to build walls, not homes. Real estate was his empire, each skyscraper a brick in his fortress. But a tabloid caught him with a model spinning lies of a playboy life. Investors balked. His West Loop project teetered. He needed a fix, fast. Their worlds collided one rainy afternoon. Ethan stopped at Dawson's bakery, craving coffee after a brutal meeting. Claire handed him a cup, distracted. It slipped, splashing his crisp suit. She laughed, a sound like bells in the gray day. "Sorry, I'm a mess today," she said, grabbing a rag. Ethan Dillsnap held storm out. Her honesty disarmed him. He watched her scrub the counter later, humming softly. She was real, raw, a flicker of light in his polished chaos. He filed her away, a name for later. Now, days after their staged kiss, Ethan stood on a rooftop overlooking the river. The gala glittered below, a sea of suits and champagne. Claire stood beside him, her cream dress swapped for an emerald gown his stylist chose. She looked stunning, auburn hair catching the city lights. Investors mingled, eyeing them. Ethan took her hand, guiding her into the crowd. "You're doing great," he murmured. "Just smile and nod." Claire squeezed his hand, harder than needed. "I'm not a doll," she replied, but she smiled anyway. They moved through the room, a perfect picture. Ethan introduced her as his fiancée, voice smooth as glass. Claire played along, her laugh charming a gruff banker, but her eyes darted, restless. Ethan noticed, curious. During a lull, he pulled her to the edge of the roof. The city sprawled beneath them, a glowing tapestry. "Why are you so tense?" he asked, softer than usual. Claire hesitated, then met his gaze. "This in my world," she said. "I don't belong up here." Ethan leaned on the railing, loosening his tie. "I don't either," he admitted. "Not really. I grew up with private jets and empty houses. I've never had a home, just properties." His voice dipped, a crack in his armor. Claire studied him, surprised. He wasn't the cold tycoon she expected. For a moment, she saw a boy lost in his own empire. "I get that," she said quietly. "My parents' bakery. It's all I have left of them. It's home, even if it's falling apart." Their eyes locked, a thread tightening between them. Ethan felt it, a pull he couldn't name. Claire felt it too, but her phone buzzed, shattering the spell. She excused herself, slipping to a corner. Her brother Jack's text glowed on the screen. "Found the plans. Caldwell's skyscraper takes out the bakery. We can stop him. Leak delays." Claire's breath caught. She glanced at Ethan, laughing with a guess. "He was the enemy once she typed back fast. "Well, stop him. Keep digging." Back at his side, Claire forced a smile. Ethan didn't see her hands clench. "You okay?" he asked, brow creasing. "Fine," she lied, brushing it off. The music swelled, a slow waltz. He offered his hand. "Dance with me," he said, almost a plea. She took it, letting him lead. His touch was warm, steady. Her heart raced, torn between his pull and her plan. They swayed, the city lights blurring below. "You're good at this," he murmured, his breath on her ear. "At what?" she asked. "Pretending," he said, grinning faintly. Claire almost faltered. Pretending, yes, but not the way he thought. She was here to save her shop, to fight him, yet his arm around her waist felt right, too right. The song ended, applause rippling through. Ethan held her a second longer, eyes searching hers. "You're a mystery, Claire Dawson," he said. She pulled away, heart pounding. "Good," she replied, voice steady. "Keeps things interesting." He chuckled, but his gaze lingered, puzzled. Later, alone on the roof, Ethan sipped whiskey, replaying her words. She was more than a prop, more than simple. Across town, Claire sat in her bakery, staring at Jack's next text. Permits stalled. H clueless. She should have smiled, but her chest tightened. Ethan's voice echoed, "I've never had a home." She pushed it down. This was war, not love. Yet as she locked up, his face lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake. The game was on, and neither knew how deep it would cut. Ethan Caldwell's private elevator hummed as it climbed to his penthouse. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond the glass walls, a constellation of lights against the night. Claire Dawson stood beside him, her emerald gown shimmering faintly. It was a week since the gala, and their charade was working. Investors called daily, charmed by their story. Ethan should have been pleased, but his mind lingered on Claire, her laugh, her defiance, the way she filled the silence he'd grown used to. Tonight he'd invited her over to rehearse their tale, or so he told himself. The doors slid open, revealing a sleek expanse of marble and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city, Lake Michigan a dark mirror below. Claire stepped out, her scuffed boots absurd against the polished floor. She turned, taking it in. "This place is insane," she said, half awed, half teasing. Ethan shrugged, loosening his tie. "It's just a view," he replied. "Come on, let's eat." He led her to the kitchen, a space he rarely used, all chrome and untouched appliances. Claire spotted the counter and grinned. "You cook?" she asked, skeptical. Ethan smirked, rolling up his sleeves. "Not really," he admitted. "Show me something." She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but you're helping." She pulled flour and butter from his pantry, her hands moving with ease. They made dough, her fingers guiding his. "Knead it like this," she said, pressing his hands into the mix. Her touch was warm, steady. Ethan fumbled, flour dusting his shirt. He laughed, a rare sound, and she joined him, her eyes bright. They sat on stools, eating warm bread straight from the oven. Claire tore a piece, handing it to him. "My parents taught me this," she said softly. "They wanted a bakery empire, but life had other plans." Ethan chewed, watching her. "I get that," he said. "My dad wanted a legacy too. He built half this city, but never built anything with me. I was just the heir, not a son." His voice dipped, raw. Claire reached out, brushing his hand. "That's lonely," she murmured. He nodded, holding her gaze. "Yeah, it was." The air shifted, heavy with something unspoken. Ethan stood, closing the gap. He cupped her face, slow and deliberate. Claire pull away. Their lips met, tender at first, then fierce. Her hands slid to his shoulders, pulling him closer. She tasted of bread and longing, a flavor that drowned his senses. He pressed her against the counter, the city lights dancing behind them. The kiss deepened, a fire neither could douse. When they broke apart, breathless, Claire's eyes searched his. "You don't know me at all," she whispered, voice trembling. Ethan frowned, confused, but she stepped back, smoothing her dress. He grabbed a box from a drawer, opening it. A diamond ring sparkled inside. "For the act," he said, offering it. "Something real to sell it." Claire took it, slipping it on. Her fingers shook slightly. "Thanks," she said, quiet. Ethan smiled, oblivious to her turmoil. "It suits you," he replied. She nodded, turning away. Deal see her clench the ringed hand, guilt gnawing at her. Earlier that day, Claire had met her brother Jack in a dim alley near the bakery. He handed her a folder. "Permit delays are in," he said, grinning. Caldwell's team thinks it's bureaucracy. Keep it up. Claire flipped through, her stomach twisting. She'd been feeding Jack fake hitches, stalling Ethan's project. It was working, the skyscraper stalled, her shop safe for now. But every smile from Ethan, every touch, made it harder. I'll handle it, she told Jack, voice firm. This is for Mom and Dad. Back in the penthouse, Claire stood by the window, the ring heavy on her finger. Ethan joined her, his arm brushing hers. Beautiful, innit? He said, nodding at the view. She forced a smile. Yeah, it is, but her mind raced. He was the enemy, the man tearing down her world. Yet his laugh echoed in her ears, his confession lingered in her chest. She wanted to hate him, needed to, but her heart whispered otherwise, a traitor in the dark. Ethan watched her, sensing a shadow. You sure you're okay? He asked, softer now. Claire nodded, too quick. Just tired, she lied. He let it go, but his eyes stayed on her. She was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a warmth he craved. As she left, he stood alone, the city silent below. Her scent lingered, bread and something sweeter. He rubbed the ring box, unsettled. Claire was changing him, and he dealt no why. Across town, Claire sank onto her bakery's worn couch. The folder lay open beside her, Jack's latest text glowing. Another delay filed. He's blind. She stared at the ring, its diamond catching the dim light. Ethan's face flashed, his voice, I've never had a home. She pressed her palms to her eyes, torn. This was just business anymore. It was personal, dangerously so. The line between love and war blurred, and Claire feared which side she'd land on. The Willis Towers sky deck shimmered 103 floors above Chicago, a crown of glass and light. Ethan Caldwell stood at its edge, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom. Tonight was the investor gala, the climax of his West Loop skyscraper pitch. Chandeliers cast golden glows over the crowd, suits and gowns swirling in a dance of wealth. Claire Dawson stood beside him, radiant in a sapphire dress that hugged her frame. The diamond ring on her finger caught the light, a silent vow to the world. Investors murmured approval, their doubts fading. Ethan felt a rare thrill, not just from the deal, but from her. He took her hand, leading her through the room. You're perfect tonight, he said, voice low and warm. Claire smiled, tight but convincing. Thanks, she replied, her hazel eyes flickering. They'd spent days perfecting this, rehearsals blending into late-night talks. Ethan believed in her, in them. The crowd parted as he pitched his vision, a tower to redefine Chicago. Claire nodded at his side, charming a silver-hailed tycoon with a quip about bread prices. Laughter rippled, and Ethan grinned. She was his lucky charm. The band struck up a slow waltz. Ethan pulled Claire close, spinning her onto the floor. Her dress flared, a sapphire flame against the glass. You're good at this, he murmured, his hand firm on her waist. She leaned in, her breath brushing his ear. You're not so bad yourself, she teased. Their steps synced, the city a blur below. For a moment it was just them, the music weaving a fragile spell. Ethan's chest tightened, a feeling he couldn't name. I don't know what I'd do without you here, he said, almost to himself. Claire's smile faltered, but he didn't catch it. They broke for air, stepping to a quiet corner. Claire excused herself, clutching her purse. I need a minute, she said, voice tight. Ethan nodded, watching her go. She slipped into a shadowed alcove, checking her phone. A text from Jack glowed. Delays hit hard. Projects on ice. You're winning. Relief washed over her, but it tasted bitter. She'd stalled Ethan's dream, saved her bakery. Yet his laugh echoed in her mind. His touch lingered on her skin. She tucked the phone away, turning back. Ethan, restless, wandered to her purse on a chair. It tipped, spilling its contents. Lipstick rolled out, then a folded paper. He picked it up, curious. Unfolding it, he froze. Scribbled notes stared back, dates and permit codes all tied to his project. Sabotage, plain and cold. His stomach dropped. These weren't mistakes. They were deliberate. He scanned the room, spotting Claire returning. Her smile faded as she saw his face, the paper in his hand. Ethan's jaw clenched, his voice a low growl. "What is this, Claire?" She stopped, breath catching. Ethan stepped closer, holding the notes up. "Was this all a game?" he asked, voice breaking. "Were you playing me?" Claire's eyes widened, panic flashing. "I can explain," she started, but he cut her off. "Explain what? That you're a spy? That every smile was a lie?" His words stung, sharp and raw. The crowd hushed, sensing drama. Claire shook her head, tears welling. "It's not what you think," she said, desperate. Ethan laughed, bitter. "Then what is it? Tell me." Claire's hands trembled. She wanted to scream the truth, her bakery, her fight, but the words stuck. "I had to protect what's mine," she managed, voice small. Ethan stared, betrayal carving lines into his face. "Protect it from me?" he asked, softer now, hurt bleeding through. Claire looked away, tears spilling. She yanked the ring off, pressing it into his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered, then turned and fled. Her heels echoed on the glass floor, a fading rhythm. Ethan stood rooted, the ring cold in his palm. The crowd whispered, cameras flashing from a corner. He should have chased her, demanded answers, but his legs wouldn't move. Her words looped in his head. "Protect what's mine." What did she mean? He trusted her, let her in. Now she was gone, and his chest ached with more than anger. It was loss, sharp and deep. He shoved the ring in his pocket, turning to the window. The city glowed, indifferent. Claire burst into the night, the Chicago wind biting her skin. She ran down Michigan Avenue, the towers blurring through tears. She'd saved her shop, but at what cost? Ethan's face, twisted with pain, haunted her. She'd meant to hurt him, not fall for him. The ring was gone, but its weight stayed, a ghost on her finger. She stopped, breathless, under a street lamp. Her phone buzzed, Jack's voice crackling through. "You did it, Claire. We won." She didn't answer, staring at the skyline. Winning felt like losing. Back at the gala, Ethan faced the investors, mask back on. He smiled, promised updates, but his voice was hollow. The deal hung by a thread, but he didn't care. Claire's absence was a hole he couldn't fill. He gripped the railing, replaying her tears. She wasn't a spy, he realized, not for a rival. This was personal. But why? The question gnawed at him, a splinter in his heart. The night stretched on, and Ethan knew one thing. This wasn't over, not yet. Dawn broke over Chicago, a soft gold spilling across Lake Michigan. Claire Dawson stood in her bakery, the air thick with flour and silence. Boxes lined the counter, half-packed with pans and photos. She'd run here after the gala, her sapphire dress crumpled on a chair. Tears stained her face as she traced a picture of her parents, smiling behind this very counter. The eviction notice was gone. Her sabotage had worked. Permit stalled Ethan's project. Her home was safe. But victory felt hollow. Ethan's voice echoed. Was this all a game? Cutting deeper than she'd expected. Across the city, Ethan Caldwell hadn't slept. His penthouse was a cage, the skyline mocking him. He'd stood by the window all night, the ring in his pocket a cold weight. Claire's words replayed. I had to protect what's mine. Not a spy, not a rival's pawn. Something personal drove her, and he needed to know what. The gala faded, investors placated with vague promises. None of it mattered. He grabbed his coat, the first light guiding him out. He had to find her. Claire lifted a rolling pin, her mother's, when the bell jingled. She froze. Ethan stepped in, disheveled, suit wrinkled, eyes red. He looked less like a billionaire, more like a man unraveling. Claire's breath caught. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice shaky. Ethan closed the door, slow and deliberate. "I need the truth," he said, quiet but firm. "No games, no lies." "Why, Claire?" She gripped the counter, torn. He deserved answers, but the words felt like stones. She took a breath, meeting his gaze. "My bakery," she started, voice trembling. "Your skyscraper, it's on this block. It would have torn this place down, my parents' dream, my home. I found out from my brother. He's a planner. We stalled your permits, fed fake delays. I had to save it. Ethan's face shifted, shock softening to realization. He stepped closer, scanning the faded walls, the worn oven. You did all this for that? He asked, almost a whisper. Claire nodded, tears welling. It's all I have left of them. Ethan rubbed his jaw, processing. I didn't know, he said, voice low. My team picks sites, I sign off. I never saw the details, never saw this place. Claire laughed, bitter. You don't have to, she said. You build, we lose. That's how it works. He flinched, her words a mirror to his life. He'd built an empire, but at what cost? He looked at her, really looked. The flower on her hands, the fight in her eyes. She wasn't simple. She was everything he'd never been. I can stop it, he said suddenly. The project, I'll shift it. There's other land. Claire blinked, stunned. You'd do that? She asked, doubtful. Ethan pulled the ring from his pocket, holding it out. For you, yeah, he said, voice rough. I thought this was just a deal, but it's more. You're more. Claire stared at the ring, her heart pounding. He knelt, not grandly but real. This time, for real, he said, blue eyes searching hers. Marry me, not for them, for us. Claire's knees weakened. She wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. How do I trust you? She asked, voice breaking. You could change your mind, bulldoze this tomorrow. Ethan stood, pulling a crumpled paper from his coat. It was his project map, her bakery circled in red ink, save scrawled beside it. He'd marked it days ago, before the gala, before her betrayal. I didn't know why then, he said, but I couldn't let it go. Not after you. This place, it's yours. I won't take it. The photo slipped to the floor, landing face up. Claire's breath hitched. Her parents smiled back, frozen in time. She looked at Ethan, tears spilling. You mean that? She whispered. He nodded, stepping closer. You're my home now, Claire, he said, voice steady. Not a building, not a deal. You. She dropped the rolling pin, closing the gap. Her hands found his face, trembling. Their kiss was slow, deep, a balm to the night's wounds. Flour dusted his coat, tears mixed with hers. They pulled back, foreheads touching. I'm sorry, she said, soft and true, for lying, for hurting you. Ethan smiled, faint but real. I'm sorry too, he replied, for not seeing you sooner. They stood there, the city waking outside. Waves crashed faintly, a new day breathing life into the silence. The ring stayed in his hand, unclaimed but heavy with promise. Claire laced her fingers with his, unsure but willing. Could they rebuild not just a bakery, but them? Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the dust in the air. Ethan squeezed her hand, a vow unspoken. Claire leaned into him, her parents' photo watching over. The fight wasn't over, trust would take time, but in that moment, they chose each other, a fragile start amid the chaos. The bakery stood, a testament to her past. Ethan stood beside her, a chance at her future. Dawn painted them gold, and for the first time, they both felt home. Ethan and Claire's story began with a deal, a masquerade of motives cloaked in Chicago's glittering skyline. He was a billionaire, a man of steel and ambition, building an empire to fill the emptiness of his past. She was a baker, fierce and grounded, fighting to hold on to the only home she'd ever known. Their worlds collided in a storm of pretense, a kiss that sparked more than they planned. What started as a game turned into a battle, not just for land or legacy, but for trust, for love, for something neither expected to find. The gala unmasked their truths, tearing them apart under the city's watchful lights. Claire's betrayal cut deep, a wound born from protecting her parents' dream. Ethan's anger masked a hurt he couldn't name, a longing she'd awakened. Yet dawn brought them back, to a bakery bathed in gold, where flour and tears sealed a fragile promise. He offered her his heart, not just a ring, and she chose to take that step, uncertain but brave. Their love rose from deception, proving even the coldest walls can crumble, even the fiercest fights can heal. This tale reminds us that love isn't always a straight path. It's messy, raw, a dance of risk and redemption. Ethan and Claire found each other in the shadows of their motives, turning enemies into soulmates. What would you risk for love? Could you forgive a lie if it led to truth? Their story doesn't end here. It's a beginning, a question left to linger. Maybe trust will grow, maybe the city will test them again, but in that sunrise they chose hope, and that's what matters. Hey, it's Emma from Emma's Stories. If Ethan and Claire's journey moved you, drop an I believe in second chances in the comments below. Tell me your favorite moment, the kiss, the fight, the dawn. Hit that like button if you felt their spark. Share this with someone who loves a good romance. Don't miss out on more tales of passion and heart. Subscribe now and join our community. Let's keep believing in love, one story at a time. See you in the next one.